Well, that was a weekend. A little bit of Pitt things happening over the weekend. Oh, nothing, just a major, complete, and utter overhaul of the offense. Brand new quarterback coming into the room. That's it. Not a lot going on. Oh, and a basketball game in the middle of it, too. We got a lot to talk about as we recap the weekend right here on the Morning Pit to get you started on a Monday on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, it's the Morning Pit. It's Monday. It's youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com. You see the website below, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, and recruiting. You find it all at Panther-Lair.com and message boards that interact with hundreds and thousands of other Pitt fans all day, every day. You can find Pitt content and conversation at Panther-Lair.com. It's where Pitt fans hang out 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I'm not exaggerating. I went to bed last night, checked the boards before I went to bed to see what people were talking about. Woke up this morning, there were new posts, there were new threads, there were new replies, there were new comments and conversations and discussions happening. It was all happening right there at Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. So if you're a Pitt fan and you're looking for other Pitt fans to talk to, you want to have conversations with other Pitt fans, the place to do it is right there. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. And then where you are right now is our YouTube channel. It's youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. It's where we put all of our video content, whether it's these daily Morning Pitt videos like the one you're watching right now. We do this Monday through Friday, a little bit of a Pitt talk show, or I would call it a talk show. We start every day with just covering all the big Pitt sports topics that are out there. We have a live show that we do every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Me and Jim Hammock get together right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com and have a conversation about Pitt sports. You could join that conversation in the chat screen, so it's fun. We have a little bit of a back and forth, it's almost like a call-in show. You know, these Morning Pits are like the talk show, and then the live stream is like a call-in show. And we do it again after road basketball games. We have live post-game shows as well. We did it after the Louisville game on Saturday. That was a lot of fun, probably because they won. Although a lot of times we get better numbers and more people want to get involved, and there's more chat comments and things like that after the loss than there is after the win, but it didn't work out that way. People were excited about that win over Louisville and they wanted to talk about it. So that's what we did on Saturday afternoon. We'll do that. I think they're on the road this Saturday, right? I should know the schedule off the top of my head. You probably know the schedule off the top of your head. But no, they're off this weekend. I'm sorry. They obviously they host Duke on Tuesday night, and then they're off until they host who do they host? Syracuse next Tuesday night. So they're off on Saturday. So we won't have any post-game show there, but after most road games, we'll have a post-game show, and it'll be live right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So you want to tune in for that. If you want to make sure you don't miss any of those live streams or the Morning Pit videos or anything like that, click subscribe. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, and that way you will be tuned in to everything that we do. You won't miss any of it. You can be a part of it. So also, like this video, because we appreciate it when you do that. Lots of stuff happened this weekend in the world of Pitt sports, and particularly with the Pitt football program, particularly on the offensive side of the ball. And we'll start with the Friday afternoon news dump. Really, it was a Friday afternoon news action. Friday, throughout the day, news action. And Pat Narduzzi overhauled the offensive staff. Frank Cignetti's already been gone. He's been gone since the day after the Duke game, replaced by Cade Bell from Western Carolina. On Friday, Narduzzi pretty much cleaned the rest of the house. Not everybody's gone, but almost everybody's gone. Andre Powell is gone. Tim Salem, gone. Dave Borbely, gone. And we're not going to sit here and dance on graves. There's a certain reality. First of all, there's the business side of this, and these guys understand it. That, in coaching, guys get fired. Yeah, that happens. And I think all three of these guys, Salem, Powell, and Borbely, have probably been fired multiple times in their careers, not because they're bad coaches or they've done a poor job, but just because that's what happens. Guys get fired. It's part of the job. What we don't need to do is necessarily sit here and celebrate. We can say, well, we think they'll upgrade this spot, or boy, that was a move they needed to make, but we don't necessarily need to celebrate. I don't know if people had a very humane reaction when like Matt Canada got fired by the Steelers. I mean, all the celebrating and stuff like that. And maybe it's different because Look, for the last 9 years, I've interviewed Andre Powell, stood face to face with the man, and had conversations with him, on and off the record. Same thing with Tim Salem. Same thing with Dave Borbely for the past 6 years when he was hired in 2018. It's probably easier from a distance. It's probably easier from afar to sit there and say, like, yeah, they finally got rid of that guy. He should have gotten the axe a long time ago. And whether a firing is merited or not, I think you can make those comments. But the full on celebrate is probably that's a step we're not going to go to. But we can talk about these moves and why they were made and what they mean and what they represent. First of all, like I said, Powell and Salem are original staff members, the last remaining original staff members from the Pitt coaching staff that Pat Narduzzi arrived with in 2015. Everybody else is gone. Everybody else has been turned over. Let's see if I can name them off the top of my head from 2015. On offense, they had John Peterson was the offensive line coach. Powell and Salem coached running backs and tight ends respectively. Jim Chaney was the offensive coordinator. Kevin Sherman was the wide receivers coach. Tom Sims coached the defensive line. Rob Harley coached the linebackers. Josh Conklin was the defensive coordinator. Ronaldo Hill was the defensive backs coach. That's pretty good. That's retention from like 9 years ago. That's pretty good. You got to give me credit for that. All those guys are gone. They're all gone. The last ones remaining from that staff were Andre Powell and Tim Salem. And the reality is, it's highly unlikely you're going to keep a whole staff together, or a majority of a staff, or even a significant portion of a staff together for 9 years. It's a credit to Narduzzi's loyalty, which, sometimes reveals itself in interesting ways. But it's a credit to Narduzzi's loyalty and maybe the jobs that Powell and Salem had done that they hung around for 9 years. But we're seeing I don't know if you call it a reconfiguring or a recasting or a rebuilding or a reshaping of the offensive coaching room. But right now, the two coaches who are standing, the two offensive coaches standing in Pitt's Southside facility are Cade Bell and Tyquan Underwood. And I don't know if either one of them was, alive when MTV came on in the air. And that's not to say nothing for nothing, other than that they're both young coaches. They're both young men, which is a complete change from what Narduzzi has typically done on the offensive side of the ball. Everyone he has hired on offense has been a veteran coach, and some of them quite old. Dave Borbely's a pretty old guy. Tim Salem's in his 60s. I think Andre Powell is as well. Mark Whipple was really, I don't want to say really old, but I mean, older guy. Matt Canada was a little bit on the younger side, but Sean Watson wasn't. Jim Chaney was older. Chris Beatty's a little, Chris Beatty was sort of in the middle there. But for the most part, Narduzzi has, over the last 9 years, leaned toward older coaches on offense. And his explanation or his justification or rationalization early on was, and whether he said this publicly or not, he was always going to be spending more of his time on the defensive side because he's a defensive coach. This year, of course, produced the infamous 85% of his time is spent on defense, and that may or may not be accurate. But he does spend more of his time on the defensive side because that's where his background is, and that's where he feels like he can help the most. And so his hirings were always guided by the principle of wanting to get veteran coaches who could run the offense on their own, more or less. That they wouldn't be young coaches sort of stumbling into, the folly of youth or just guys lacking experience. And we're now seeing that change. We're now seeing that shift with Cade Bell and Tyquan Underwood. And maybe the other three hires that he makes on offense are all going to be guys in their 70s. I doubt it. That possibility exists. But even if they are, still having a guy as young as Cade Bell calling the shots and as young as Tyquan Underwood coaching the receivers, it's a shift. It's a shift in direction, a shift in philosophy, I think, in how the offense is being run. And no matter what you want to say, and no matter what you will say about Pat Narduzzi, and I think we said this after, on the Monday after the Duke game, after Frank Cignetti had been fired, I don't think you can ever accuse him of failing to recognize an issue. He may not always have the proper solution to a problem, But he's able to recognize it. He sees the problems, and he has made changes. I don't think you can burn through as many offensive coordinators as he has over the last 9 years and say, well, he's been content to have crappy offenses. I mean, he didn't fire Jim Chaney, but I think he was fine with letting him go and going in a different direction. He wanted to keep Matt Canada, but that offense was pretty good. He fired Sean Watson. He was ready to fire Mark Whipple after 2020, hung on to him because Kenny Pickett was coming back in 21 and ended up getting a ACC championship winning offense out of it. But then all parties were ready to go in other directions at the end of that season. He hired Frank Cignetti, not because he didn't like scoring and he wanted to have a bad offense, but because he wanted to have a more balanced offense and thought Cignetti could do it. After 2 years, it was pretty clear that he couldn't, and Narduzzi moved on. You can't accuse him, and that's in addition to firing John Peterson, firing Kevin Sherman. He lost Chris Beatty. That was a legitimate loss. I mean, that was a guy he wanted to hold on to. He left. Brennan Marion, they were probably ready to part ways with each other by the end, but he's now fired Tim Salem and Andre Powell. And I think, whatever we want to say about the performance of the tight ends, whatever we want to say about the running back personnel usage or this or that, it represents Narduzzi recognizing an issue. And I think the offense stunk so bad this year, and the offense was such an issue this year, that Narduzzi came out of the season looking to institute a pretty major overhaul. And I don't know if he flew back from Duke thinking, I'm going to fire every one of these guys except Taekwon, or if he said, look, I've got to find out how we went so horribly wrong this year. And that's my guess, is that he came out of the season saying, I've got to figure out why we were so bad. I know Frank has to go, but I got to figure out which one of these other 4 guys I can count on to improve this offense. And he got to the end of December, and they got past the signing period and, pretty much past the transfer period, and said, Powell and Salem have to go, and Borbley. And so you end up with one offensive coach coming back, for what constitutes effectively an overhaul, a complete overhaul of the offense. And so whatever you say, don't accuse Pat Narduzzi of being content to stand pat on bad offense. Don't accuse him of failing to recognize bad offense. He might not always get the replacement hires right. He may not always do a good job with the coordinators he hires, but he has never shied away from cutting ties and moving on. Loyalty, like I say, Pat Narduzzi's loyalty sometimes reveals itself in funny ways. I don't think it has ever slowed him down from making changes he felt he needed to make in order to improve the team. And that's what he's done here. As far as the legacies of Powell and Salem, I mean, Powell had 1,000-yard rushers in 2015, 2016. He had 2 of them in 2018. None again until 2022, although those 3 years in between, 19, 20, and 21, were the Mark Whipple years. Now, you could also say in those years, particularly 2021, Powell had some rather curious and maybe questionable personnel decisions at the running back position, namely Izzy Abanikanda not getting more work than he got. But on the whole, I mean, I think he had productive running back units. I think the usage and the rotations were questionable this season. This past season, I should say. There are always sort of lingering questions of what the running back usage would have looked like in 2021 if Rodney Hammond didn't get hurt in the West Virginia game. Would Powell have, still gone to Izzy Abanikanda as heavily as he did, or would he have engaged in some curious rotations again and, potentially cut the legs off of, or cut the, call it that, cut the legs off of Pitt's best offensive approach and offensive attack in Izzy Abanikanda. So I think there were questionable decisions along the way that probably contributed to it. His recruiting never really delivered what they needed it to deliver out of the Maryland, D.C. area. Most of the success they had in Virginia was, in the Tidewater area, the 757 with Chris Beatty. I think Beatty was even really responsible for Jordan Addison. We might have given Powell credit for it at the time, but I think Jordan Addison was more of a Beatty recruit than a Powell recruit. So, he probably needed to produce more. And then Tim Salem with the tight ends. I think he was a really good recruiter at a lot of positions. He brought really good players. Kenny Pickett, Izzy Abanikanda, Mac Gonsalves, Servassier Dennis kind of headline that list, but a lot more even beyond that. His position itself, though, tight end, was never really able to. They were never able to get any kind of traction with recruiting. They had big 3-man classes in 2017 and 2019, I think it was, and then multiple years where they just didn't sign any high school guys at all. They relied on transfers a lot and basically hit on one high school tight end over the last 9 years, and that was Gavin Bartholomew. For whatever reason, and there's a lot of reasons, we've talked about it a lot, and I don't want to spend the next 5.5 minutes, of this podcast talking about the issues with recruiting tight ends. But it was a problem. And I think it got overshadowed or kind of accepted a little bit because Salem recruited other positions well and recruited areas well. But for the most part, he just, I think it was pretty disappointing overall with what Tim Salem was able to do on the recruiting front. Just with the tight end position. I mean, at some point, some of that falls on him. And the position, the lack of productivity in the position, although there's probably a lot of factors that go into that as well. Dave Borbley, I think, was fine. I think Borbley probably was getting close to retirement anyway. I think he dealt with injuries and did the best he could with some of the injury situations they ran into, particularly over the last few years when they had a lot of guys come back as super seniors, but ended up not being able to use most of them because of the injuries. You look at all the different offensive line combinations they had this year. You look at 2022 when all of those guys who came back for their super senior season never actually played together. It's a tough situation. It was a tough situation. He was still the O-line coach here when Pitt had 2 1,000-yard rushers in 2018. Obviously, he was the O-line coach that paved the way for Izzy Abanikanda in 22, paved the way for that record-setting ACC championship-winning offense in 2021. So I think Borbley did a fine job, but at some point, you understand moving on. And we'll see if they get a little bit younger there. We'll see what Pat Narduzzi decides to do. I can't imagine he'll waste too much time getting a new running backs, tight ends, and offensive line coach in here. So that was how the weekend started. It started with basically a complete overhaul of the offensive coaching staff on Friday afternoon. By Sunday afternoon, there was another big piece of news, and it was a piece of news we sort of were anticipating. We talked about it a little bit. We talked about it on the live stream on Wednesday night. Jim and I did. Eli Holstein, the former 4-star quarterback from Alabama. Well, he's from Louisiana, went to Alabama, was a freshman in 2023, is transferring to Pitt. Holstein, like I say, was a top 150 overall recruit in the class of 2023, a top 10 pro-style quarterback prospect in the class of 2023. He was a three-year starter in high school, threw for 7,000 yards, 62 touchdowns, and just 13 interceptions. He rushed for 1,200 yards and 30 touchdowns in those 3 years. His junior season, he led his team to a state championship. He threw for 3,200 yards and 30 touchdowns, rushed for another 14 scores. He's a big quarterback. He's like 6'3". He's built. He's sort of stocky. I've heard in terms of physical build, I've heard comparisons to Josh Allen. I mean, he's that kind of a quarterback, a big, I don't want to say bulky because bulky sounds like fat. It sounds like a way to not say fat. And I don't think he's fat, but he's a big linebacker. He's not a big linebacker. He's a big quarterback. Some people have joked that he looks like a linebacker. But, I mean, he's a big guy. And you watch his film, and maybe the windup looks a little interesting with the throwing motion, but the ball flies. The ball flies out of his hands. And I've seen some criticisms online that he needs to improve his accuracy on short passes or touch on short passes. I think a lot of high school quarterbacks going into college need to work on their accuracy and touch on short passes. Do the top 5% of guys need to work on their accuracy and touch on short passes? No. Do 60% of sophomores in college need to work on their accuracy and touch on short passes? Probably. So that's something you can work on. Give me the guy with the giant arm who can throw it 90 yards. And let's work on, give me the guy with that natural physical skill and talent and those tools, and let's work on building up that short passing game and the quick passing game. He ran RPOs in high school, which is going to be something he's going to see with Cade Bell. He's going to be running with Cade Bell. Holstein and his family were in Pittsburgh for a visit over the weekend. Spent a lot of time with Bell. Got to know a lot about Bell. Got to know a lot about his offense. Sat for about 2 hours going over the offense and the reads and the calls and the formations and the concepts. And Bell feels like it's a good fit for Holstein. Holstein feels like he's a good fit for the offense. Everybody feels really good. And actually, you can see up at the top of the screen there, up in the upper left-hand corner, don't click that. That's an image of our front page. But if you go to the front page at Panther-Lair.com, you can read that article about Eli Holstein and why he picked Pitt and what it was about Pat Narduzzi and Cade Bell and the city of Pittsburgh and everything. I highly recommend it because, it's great to hear somebody who's enthusiastic about Pitt and wants to be at Pitt and his dad's really excited and all this stuff. But at the same time, his comments about Cade Bell, I think you're really going to enjoy reading. I think you'll like seeing what he had to say about Bell. So I highly recommend going to check that out. So what does this mean? They're bringing in a guy who's a freshman. He'll be a redshirt freshman in the fall because he didn't play at all last year at Alabama. He was on the scout team, although we've heard that he did really well on the scout team playing against Alabama's defense, which they're pretty good. What does he represent, though, when you bring him into the quarterback room? He's joining a room that there will now be 5 scholarship quarterbacks in the room. Nate Yarnell and Christian Veyer, redshirt juniors. Ty Diefenbach is a redshirt freshman. Eli Holstein is a redshirt freshman, and Julian Duggar coming in from Penn Hills as a true freshman. And all 5 of those guys are going to be here in the spring, which is notable, I think. Julian Duggar's moving in as an early enrollee. Obviously Diefenbach, Yarnell, and Veyer are already here, and Holstein is just staying. He came for his visit, and he's just going to stay. He plans to be at the meetings this morning and meet with the team and start throwing with the guys. His host during his visit was Kenny Johnson, so he's building that bond with the Pitt star second-year receiver, soon-to-be second-year receiver. So how does he fit in here? Are they bringing in Eli Holstein to be the starter in 2024? I don't think that's the intention. And that doesn't mean that he's not going to be the starter. It doesn't mean he can't be the starter. They're bringing him in to compete. They're bringing him in to compete with Nate Yarnell, bringing him in to compete with Christian Veyer, bringing him in to compete with Ty Diefenbach and Julian Duggar. They want all 5 of those guys to compete and see who emerges as the best option. And maybe it's Nate Yarnell. Nate Yarnell will go into spring camp as the number 1 quarterback, or he should at least. If he doesn't go into spring camp as the number 1 quarterback, then there's something really wrong because he finished the season as the number 1 quarterback and was playing pretty well when he did it. I think Nate Yarnell showed in the last few games that he actually might be that he is a legitimate Power 5 quarterback. And he's good enough to win games at the Power 5 level. You can make a bowl game with Nate Yarnell at a minimum. And I'm not saying that's his ceiling, but I'm saying at a minimum, you can win a bowl game with Nate Yarnell. Christian Veyer showed he needs to get the turnovers under control. He needs to improve ball security. He puts the ball in jeopardy way too much, and he came back and bit him when he had like 6 interceptions in 3 games or whatever. And ended up, I recited and repeated those stats so many times over the course of the season, and now I've blocked them all out completely about how many interceptions Veyer threw during his starts there after Phil Dracovic got benched. But he's got to get those interceptions under control. And if he doesn't, then he's just not a viable option. And this is the reality of it. And then you get into sort of the unknown. Holstein, Diefenbach, Duggar. You don't know what those guys can do. We know all the physical traits. Holstein, like I said, they're all big, for one thing. They're all big. Diefenbach is probably the tallest quarterback on the roster. Nate Yarnell is not far behind, if he's behind at all. Julian Duggar is really tall. Holstein is tall, and also he's filled out. He's sort of that bigger quarterback, like I said. He's got, I would say, probably the biggest arm out of those 3. Maybe the biggest arm on the team. I mean, he's got a cannon for an arm, just from watching the videos. If you watch his videos and you compare it to the videos of the other quarterbacks, that doesn't mean they can't throw, but he's got the biggest arm. Ty Diefenbach's got some nice natural tools. I've been high on Julian Duggar for a long time. I mean, you could go back to June or July or whenever it was when I did a video saying, should Julian Duggar be Pitt's quarterback in this class? Advocating for it before it really even happened. And so I think he's got something he can do as well. I think he's got good tools, and I think he can make things happen. So I think what Holstein does is brings another live arm, a big athletic body, and some pretty good quarterback skills and tools into the quarterback room to compete with Yarnell, Veyer, Diefenbach, and Duggar. Now, I think you bring in a transfer like this because you're hoping he will ultimately be the starter. If not in 2024, then maybe in 2025. You're bringing in a guy with his pedigree as a 4-star prospect who had offers from all over the place. You're bringing in a guy with his pedigree with the thought that he's going to be your starter at some point. And maybe that's sooner, maybe it's later, but at some point he's going to be your starter. That's the hope, the belief, I would think. Now, whether that happens now, or whether that happens next year, or whether it never happens, I don't know. But he's got a lot. There's a lot to like. He's got a lot of tools, and he's got a lot of skills. And I mean, he's coming from Alabama. It's worth something, right? It's worth a lot, actually. It's worth a lot. So, quite a weekend for Pitt football on the offensive side. Complete overhaul of the coaching staff, and a new, pretty prominent quarterback joining the room. Pretty interesting stuff. Hopefully you were paying attention. We didn't even get a chance to talk basketball. I kind of figured that would be the case, but given that they play Duke tomorrow night, I figured tomorrow will be a good day to dive into some basketball stuff. Good performance from the Panthers at Louisville, though. They did what they needed to do, got some step-up, showings and performances that they needed to get, and I think overall had a pretty good game, the kind of game they needed, and the kind of performance they're going to need to replicate if they're going to have a chance against Duke tomorrow night. We'll talk about that tomorrow, though. For now, Salem out, Powell out, Borbely out, Holstein in. A lot of moves on the Pitt football front, particularly on the offensive side of the ball. I'm sure we're not done talking about it. We'll have a lot to talk about that and more as we move forward through the week and through the offseason. There's going to be a lot to discuss. But that was the weekend. I hope you kept up on it. I hope you paid attention. If you didn't check out that article at the top of the page there with Eli Holstein talking about Cade Bell, Pat Narduzzi, City of Pittsburgh, and everything else, I highly recommend it. He had a lot of good stuff to say, and I interviewed his dad. His dad had a lot of good stuff to say. I think you'll enjoy the read, so check that out. Thanks for watching this video today. I hope you had a great weekend. Make sure you like and subscribe, and we will catch up with you tomorrow morning for the Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.